Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing today? My name is Michelle Lakov. I'll be your moderator today. And I'd like to introduce you to our beautiful panel. Joining us today, we have Samanda John, Gordon Wong, and Nirav Shah. I'd like to give our panel an opportunity to introduce themselves. Samanda, would you like to start?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Samanda Jean. I am a marketing manager at MassBio, and I tell my story with data all the time. And I'm more so on the data, the storytelling part of the data. So really looking forward to share and actually learn from everybody here.
Thanks, Amanda. As a fellow marketer, I'm also more on the storytelling side, so excited about that. Gordon, how about you?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Great. Thank you for that. Good to see you all. So I'm Gordon Wong. I am a serial data and analytics leader. Pretty much all I've done my entire career. I've worked at a lot of startups, building and mentoring departments, and I'm newly the head of data over at ActBlue.
Thanks, Gordon. And Nirav, how about you?
Good. Hi, guys. Glad to be here. Nirav Shah. I run a small boutique consulting company called OnPoint Insights. Been doing data for like 15 plus years. As I joke that the data scientist title was not invented or coined. We were an application software, so we were application engineer. But anyways, so pretty excited to be here. Along with my role at OnPoint, I also teach at Tufts, so communicating with data and data visualization. So love talking about storytelling.
Amazing. Thank you. Now, before we jump in, just to get a sense for the people in the room, apologies to our virtual participants, just to give our panel some context for their questions, can we just get a hand raise? Do we have any data scientists or data analysts in the room? How about fellow marketers? Any engineers? All right. And then any fellow executives, co-founders, more on that side? All right. Thank you so much. Hope that's some helpful context for our conversation today. We will have time for questions at the end, so keep those in mind. I'll definitely save some time for them, but let's dive right in. The first question I have for you all is, how does design and storytelling play a role in communicating with data?
So I'll take that one. So again, like I said, I'm not necessarily in the data world, but I do a lot of storytelling. And usually when I get a bunch of data, it's very intimidating, right? Because you just have a bunch of numbers and you don't really know what that means. And then you have an audience that you have to tell the story to. So usually how I go about it is I'll look at what the data is telling me and to kind of get familiarize myself with that data. Then I start picking out like the things that are sticking out to me, right? And then I have to think about my audience. Who are they? What am I relating to them? Is that human aspect? Like, what is it that they really need to know? And then that's kind of, I start forming that story from there, right? And I love using pictures because, as we know, videos are like key right now. So how do we use those videos? How do you use those pictures? And how do I communicate this information to my audience, basically? So it's heavy on actually understanding the data. So I do rely a lot of my coworkers and Google and ChatGPT to help me understand what's going on. But then also just like using my experiences and the past experiences of talking to my audience to help them understand those data.
Any other comments, Gordon or Nirav, on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to add to that. So, as a technologist or engineer, you might think that, oh, well, storytelling is an artistic thing. It's not for me, right? It's sort of fuzzy. I'm going to tell you that I think that storytelling is one of humankind's greatest superpowers, right? Stories have characters. They have plots. They have struggles, right? They should have an outcome. A happy story has a happy outcome, right? So as engineers building solutions, especially with data, what we're trying to do is create happy outcomes. That is what you do with data, right? You turn it into knowledge, you drive an informed decision that pushes some outcome that you want, right? You tell the wrong story, you get the wrong outcome potentially. You tell your story poorly, no one takes an action, right? They don't get the lesson. There's no outcome, right? So storytelling, all behind it.
Yeah, totally, agree with Gordon. I keep telling my data analysts and even my students that nobody cares for what kind of model or what kind of tool do you use. If your story or your insights are great, you can put that on a back of an envelope and the CEO would take it. They all get so caught up in machine learning and deep learning and neural networks and all of that, but they forget the most human element, which is storytelling, right? We've been telling stories for generations before even the printing press came, right? So ChatGPT and Google and Stack Overflow is great, but nothing beats storytelling. And add to Gordon, right? If the insights are not valuable and the story is not there, nobody would use that model. And unfortunately, all the work which goes into doing the analysis is going to be thrown away. So I'm always worried about that part and keep hammering every time to my analysts and my students.
I completely agree. A lot of the times what I find myself saying when speaking to more technical folks is remember the how, the why, not the how. That's the first thing you want to lead with. And I think that's actually a good segue into our next question, because as you've all said, we're all storytellers, whether or not we want to be, whether or not we like to be. It's a requirement for us to succeed in our jobs. So what are some of the most common mistakes or challenges that people face when communicating data? Samantha, why don't we start with you?
So I would say the very first one is from my experience. I don't simplify the data. So after working with it for a little while, I'm like, oh, of course I get it. Like, I know what this says. And then I present it to people and they're like, what is this? Like, what are you telling me? Right. So I always say, like, you have to really look at it again, the audience, that human aspect. Who is it? Like, who are you talking to and what are they looking for? Right. So once I figure that out, then I have to present it in a very simple manner, very easy to understand. And again, depending on my audience, if I'm doing it to a CEO or the board, they have like very short time. So I really need to have like a very key points. This is what you need to know. And this is how it's going to affect whatever objective that we have. If it is my marketing folks, I'm like, okay, well, we've done these marketing campaigns and this is how it worked. This is what didn't work, and kind of like using it like that. So yeah.
Gordon, it sounds like you agree. What do you think?
Totally agree. And then, I think another way of putting that for me is that one of the mistakes is actually trying too hard, as opposed to trying easier. Like, so as a technologist, I could go to a business user and talk to them about this Snowflake data warehouse I built using these various tools and this and that. And there's literally a trillion rows in this table. They don't care about any of that. What I should be doing is enabling people like Samantha, who's an expert in her space, and to help her tell the story. Let me provide the data. Let me provide the knowledge. Let me prove that it's right. Okay. Let me give you the evidence so that you could talk to your stakeholders and prove to them that it's right, so they have confidence in what you're saying. Right. And so, instead of trying to do everything poorly, find the strongest leverage within the chain and lean into that.
Nirav, what do you think? Especially, I'm curious with your students, what are some of the common mistakes that you see come up there?
Oh boy. Some of the common mistakes across our analysts and my students, and even conferences and presentations generally, is getting caught up into the technical aspect of the details, right, of the data. Technical aspects are great if you are talking to data analysts and data scientists, but it doesn't work with business. Okay, so the why is important. What the business is asking is important, and what we like to do because all the work we do is client facing because of the consulting aspect of it, right? Don't move ahead into analyzing till you haven't done the business requirement.
Mhm.
I think the business requirement and requirement gathering is so important. We just, like, technical folks just jump into using, whether Snowflake or data tool or Tableau or Power BI, whatever they are using. And sometimes you hear this, we do a lot of manufacturing and life sciences, right? So once a data analyst came, had analyzed the model, just to give an example, right? Pressure is correlated to flow. Well, flow and pressure would be correlated. But because you just look at the data and without understanding the domain, if that analysis would have gone to the client would have thrown us out, right? So without understanding the business, all that data is useless, to be honest. So I think those are the key aspect for technical folks is those are the challenges, how to take a step back and put yourself in the shoes of the business and what are their value.
I have a feeling why and not how is going to be a common theme of today's conversation.
I also have one more thing to add. I
Please.
think the visualization of your data is also one of those key points. So you have a bunch of data set and then you have to tell them like what this means. Sometimes people just write out like a paragraph, like, and you don't have time to read it. Or they'll just give you a bar graph with like no information on it. Like, what am I reading? So you have to be very meticulous and particular on how you present that data. And I like to play around with it, to be honest. Like, let's say you own like a cookie company. Why not use some cookies like crumbling out, so people relate to that more, instead of just, like using a pie chart, which they're fun, they're okay, but,
Sure.
Maybe actual pies, right? So
Don't use pie charts.
Don't use pie charts. No.
Okay, what are everyone's real thoughts on pie charts?
we don't like them.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, let me throw you another question, Samantha. When you are trying to find ways to visualize your data, and I guess this applies to all of you, what are some of the places that you're going to look for this? I know I have a favorite tool, Canva, which is what I call design for marketers or design for dummies. But I'm curious if there are other tools. I think that's a very practical kind of thing that a lot of people are looking for.
Yeah, so Canva is like what I personally use. It's very easy to use. So we actually have like our design person as well. So I don't necessarily do any more of the visualization. I just tell them this is what I want to see. So I just like to get creative. Honestly, in the shower, I just think about, oh my God, this data. And then it just kind of like an image pops into my head and I play around with it. And one of the things I'll just add to that is I have to talk to the audience that I am presenting this data to. So again, if it's the board, I pick one or two people and I ask them, like, does that make sense to you before I present it out? So technically, yes, I will say Canva, and Adobe, I think, is also a good one. I know that they use Photoshop, but Canva would be your best if you do not know how to design. They have like preset for you, so it's great.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I want to kind of dive into audiences a little bit, because I think you guys have all started to touch on this a little bit. You have to change the way that you tell your story for different audiences. As a product marketer, this is my entire life, day in and day out. I'd be curious as to some of the tactics or questions or thought processes you all go through when adapting the way that you present data or talk about data to different audiences, whether that's fellow executives, your executive team, the team that's reporting into you, investors. Rob, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Right. So again, going back to the consulting aspect, right? So what we divide our audience is basically into 3 layers, right? One we call as the C-level, who obviously they have, as I like to say, attention span of 30 seconds, right? So if the dashboard is not doing the job of showing them in 30 seconds, basically I've lost them. They might sit in the audience for 30 minutes, but basically we have lost the story. Then is the managerial, like, director level. They know more about the stuff. Like, obviously they might not be into the weeds of the data, but they know more compared to a C-level. And then there are the people, like, say, if you're manufacturing, then process engineers. If you're working with R&D data, the scientists and all, they know more about it, what exactly the data, what kind of variables have you generated and all. So those are the 3 different levels kind of we stick to. And obviously things can change moving around, but that's what it is, right? So at the C-level, so VP and C-level, it's obviously is your dashboard and visualization telling the story, right? It could be a combination of just pure data analytics or machine learning using a dashboard. With the director and managerial level, more further insights to tell the whole story, can get into a little bit more technical. And then with the the domain experts, wherever the data is, there we can get into like further into the weeds. So those are the 3 levels we try to stick to. Works good.
Gordon, you look like you have a thought.
I always have a thought, right? It's not necessarily, is it a good thought or a bad thought? I'm very reductionist. So I think a lot about foundations, right? I'm not a great person for memorizing a lot of facts. It's easier for me to understand foundations. So I think about, like, in terms of my audience, I can divide them up into the size of the time grain of the decisions they care about. So what I mean by that is that individual may care about the day, the week, the month, the quarter, right? So a salesperson might be thinking about, who should I call next? Who's my hot prospect? That's their daily decision right there, right? Weekly decision might be like, hey, as a manager, thinking about staffing levels. Am I covered, right? What kind of problems if I don't have enough people, right? If you're CFO, she might be thinking about, are we tracking to this quarter? What are we going to say to the investors at a board meeting, right? So thinking about the time grain and then thinking about what their pain is. And if you can alleviate people's pain, you could help them, be productive, right? Now, pain sounds kind of fuzzy, but like really, again, they wouldn't be turning to you for data. They wouldn't be turning to you for help if they weren't struggling with something. So maybe you don't have to call it pain. You can call it struggle, right? Salesperson wants to call prospects and make money. A manager wants to have proper staffing. The CFO wants a company to be healthy, right? And driving, so on and so on, right? So you think about these decisions, the size of the decision, and you think about the degree of pain, it's going to lead you to the opportunities that you could have some impact against.
I have no comment.
Fair enough. I'd actually be particularly curious about, we've talked a lot about audiences inside the company, but at the end of the day, companies are always serving clients and customers. How do you think about data and visualizing that data or turning that data into words and communicating that to the personas in your client base?
I have a comment now.
I thought you might.
So I work in the life sciences, and one of the key points for us is we have different clients. So we have the companies, and then we also have the employees. And in the life sciences, all the employees are also our audience. So I have to always figure out, if we're putting up a forum, for example, where are people getting their information? So what data do I need to figure out to get to those people? What do they care about? What do they like? What colors appeal to them? So a lot of those times, I think there is information everywhere. So there's not one place that I get my information. I ask people, I consult with my other workers, and I ask the audience as well, what do you care about? What do you like? What don't you want to see? And then I sort of use those information to relay that story. And then we get into the design process, which is a lot more fun. But we get to actually relay that information back to them. And then that's where you see that the person was actually taken into consideration. They see themselves in the images, they see their stories, and they can relate more to it. And then they attend the events, or they participate with your poll that you're doing, or they relay the message that you want. They sign the petition, whatever it is that you want them to do. When you relate it back to them, when you ask them the information, they will actually engage with you.
That's super helpful. I actually also want to throw a little bit of a curveball, Nirav and Gordon, to you from a very technical perspective. I think a lot of the times folks in data analysts or engineering or very technical roles are very removed from the client experience or the customer journey. I'd be curious as to any recommendations or thoughts that you have that those folks in the organization should keep in mind or think about when they're processing data or communicating or helping other folks in the company communicate data to the customers. Any thoughts there?
Yeah. So communicating external to your organization is definitely a whole nother level of difficulty, right? So when you're dealing with internal stakeholders, feedback is easier. You have more empathy. You have more overlap. You have a better sense of what story they're interested in. But these external stakeholders, these people outside your company, you don't get feedback frequently. You may never see them. I don't know how many people are on the virtual conference, right? I can see the room, but I don't know how many people in the virtual conference. I'm not getting feedback from them. I'm not seeing facial expressions. So it requires, I believe, having some education about if you're at a company, right? A company, what's your product market fit? What's your total addressable market? What the problem is your customers care about, and getting educated about that, right? Having empathy with that long distance customer, right? Having some notion internally about what they care about, which will benefit you as both, not just an employee, but as a person, because then it helps reinforce your reason for being there. So, do your homework, figure out what the customers really care about, look for that pain again, right? Think about the information they want on it, the honest information, and then try to find a degree of optimism, right? When I communicate with people, I want to give them better options. And I have to believe there's some better outcome than what they have right now, because otherwise, what's the point, right? So it's looking for that optimism.
No, great, right? What we tell analysts and what we have started training is more on the design aspect of it. So going back to the tools like Canva, we use Figma a lot. It usually feels like a UX person's tool. But our data analysts have started incorporating Figma because again, going back to the requirement gathering sessions and what they understand from it, and then developing those, Figma dashboards helps them to basically go back and forth with the client. The other aspect is for the optimism and the pain part of it, right? We being in consulting have to really come up to speed on what the client's problems are, because we work from manufacturing to retail to wearable devices, right? Again, there are multiple layers to those problems. What we do the analysis, is it going to be used internally with few of our clients, in wearable devices? What we are analyzing and what we are bringing to the table is part of their product rollout. So it's not going on now only to our customer, it's our customers, right? So those dashboards are embedded into the mobile application which we have built along with Power BI or Tableau or whatever, right? But that's going to their customer. So these are like enterprise level customers. So we have to think from that perspective as an analyst, right? Like what are we trying to show, and guide the audience, guide our client also as to what's possible, what's the best way to show, and give the brain power to it, because they have those problems in their domain. They are not worried about the data part or how to show it and what. So we need to guide them, and so that's very important.
And Nirav, you've mentioned a few tools here, and I want to dive into that a little bit more. We've have a few come up already. We talked about Canva, we've talked about Figma. I heard Snowflake come up. I heard Tableau come up. There's an endless amount of data tools. And so I'm curious, I think this is also a very practical question for those in the audience. What are your go-to data tools? What are the things you cannot live without in your day-to-day work? Nirav, why don't we jump in, since you were just talking about some of your favorites, and we'll go down the line.
Yeah, different areas, right? So we being again, consulting company, right? The motto we have kept from day one is that we are tool agnostic in a way, right? We don't throw any tool on the client. Most of the times, if they have something in-house which their enterprise is using, we've done a lot of like tool comparison study when the clients are in early stages, so that they can navigate and make an informed decision. To give an example, one of the wearable devices company, we had initially recommended Power BI, but they wanted to go with AWS QuickSight because their data was in AWS, and they thought, QuickSight is the small BI tool within AWS, would be perfect in leveraging within the same ecosystem. Few months down the line, they turned back and said, "Oh no, you guys were right. Power BI would be better because it was not able to do the total job which they wanted to do." But anyways, coming to data visualization, we use primarily like Power BI, Tableau, and sometimes R Shiny. Okay. And on the machine learning side, primarily like Python and R, and some no-code, low-code tools.
Got it. Gordon, how about you? What are your biggest data tool?
Fivetran, Snowflake, dbt, and Sigma. Now, I figured I'd be a little bit explicit this time, but really thinking about if you think about producing decisions, right? Because we're trying to produce decisions with data, right? And you work backwards from there. There's really one big decision that's going to drive your whole business, right? So it's really a chain of decisions. It looks a lot like a manufacturing process, right? It looks a lot like a food chain even, right? So the verbs in this, in terms of turning data into knowledge, are things like measure, move, prepare, integrate, analyze, present, right? Those kind of verbs like that. So I think about each of these verbs and what tools are best in these areas at this period of time, and also for your time frame, your window of return, right? Do you need to do something in a month, or are you building for 3 years, right? These are different tools. But like I mentioned, Fivetran. Fivetran is a movement tool. Gets data out of your source systems into your warehouse. I like it because you take advantage of all the pre-built connectors, right? So these days, 10 years ago, I would have been hiring data engineers who knew Java, who could really hit APIs and so on and so on. But these days, I can take advantage of these existing connectors, right? So something like a Fivetran, which could be expensive sometimes it's not. So you got to look at what you're trying to save on, people time versus machine time. Snowflake is a default for data warehouse. There are other choices, but it's a It's a pretty good platform. It's got excellent ecosystems. It's typically a vendor's first choice in terms of support. So, and I happen to know it really well, so I like it, right? SQL is SQL. It's good. It's still around. dbt enables SQL really well, so that's an open source package for doing data transformations, in case people don't know. And the Sigma is sort of a new play in the BI space. I like it a lot because it's got a spreadsheet metaphor. And the reason I like that is because a lot of users like spreadsheets, right? So it's just easier for the user. Again, trying to find the thing that enables the people who are using the system, right? I could give them Jupyter notebooks, so kind of Python notebook, right? If they don't know Python, right, they're sort of out of luck. But a lot of people understand spreadsheets.
Just to add, the most used data analytics tool is Excel.
Oh man, that's what I was gonna say. I was like, nobody said anything about Excel.
Yeah.
Oh,
Lots
'cause
of
I use
Excel
that.
fans here.
Yeah, like we all familiarize with Excel. Like we've been using it for years. So I'll say Excel. We talked about Canva. So my company uses Power BI, and that sort of like integrates with all our system, like our CRM, which is like our customer relation management. And I get all my information from there when it comes to like who attended an event, what the emails are saying to me. So I think those are the top 3 that I personally use. And of course, Excel again, shout out.
I actually want to touch on that for a second too, because absolutely I agree that Excel is possibly the most powerful data tool in the history of the world. But there's this struggle between sort of central and embedded, or performance and flexibility, right? Excel is the ultimate flexible tool. Anyone could use it. You could do just about anything. But when you have flexibility, you give up governance, right? So how do you do security with Excel? How do you do data quality Excel? How do you do reliability, right? These things are hard, and if you're an engineer, you would call them a non-functional requirement, but they're things that enable your final product to be usable. So go back to our food chain metaphor. You know, you could, if your food's delicious but not safe to eat, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So I want Excel in my ecosystem, but as a manager who's building this platform, I have to figure out how to solve for those non-functional requirements of security, quality, reliability.
Let's pretend for a second that the 3 of you all work for the same organization in your current jobs, your different departments, but you're all for the same company. That means that right now at this one company, we have at minimum 15 data tools just with 3 people. Forget every other department, forget everybody else in the organization. With 3 people, we've got 15 different tools of data. So let's talk a little bit about navigating data, because I think the basis to any good story is to figure out which data are we focused on. I think, Samantha, you were talking about this a little bit earlier. How do you parse through all of this data and decide, okay, I care about these 15 tools or these 3 tools. My team or my manager might care about one fact from these tools. My client might care about a different one. How do you navigate that? How do you decide which data matters? Amanda, why don't you go ahead?
Yes. So the data matters depending on the audience. We don't get to really choose that, right? So who the audience is when what the data is going to be for. So the data is going to tell you a bunch of stories, but what story is going to relate to the person or the people that you're trying to talk to? I always would rely on the experts themselves. And I'll just ask them, this is the question that I have. These are the stories that I want to tell. This is my hypothesis based on me just seeing some raw data. What do you think I should use? What do you see? You've been doing this for a little while. And then I go from there. So working with them, I'll most likely call them up, Teams them every 2 seconds. Does this work? So yeah.
Gordon, do you have thoughts to add?
Yeah, I mean, so in the old days, we used to build data warehouses, right? And then it'd be like a big, heavy requirements gathering session, and you had an 18-month roadmap. You spent 2 years building this thing. You delivered it late. It was missing features, and it was out of date before you ever produced it, right? It was the wrong way to do this. But we did it because we thought, hey, we need all the data. Go get the data. Data's got all this value. When you use this term as data-driven, it's the wrong term. It's the wrong term. We should always be working backwards from the business problem. Every company has only a handful of insight flows that they really care about. Marketing, product, finance, customer support, right? Find the customers, deliver value, write good contracts, these things. These flows have standard problems that we care about. Maybe you call it return on ad spend, but it's basically hey, can I contact people for less cost than it takes that they're going to give to me later on, right? Can I deliver value for less cost than it takes to produce it, right? Can I write a contract that benefits both sides, right? So these problems exist. So what is the problem you care about right now? And then work backwards from it. So, I have a methodology I jokingly call day one. If I was going to deliver something today, what would it be? Today, something that has some value, right? And the scope's going to have to be really, really tiny because I care about the production quality. I can't give you junk, right? Security, quality, reliability, we said earlier. So we're working backwards and then iterating on that. I'm a data modeler by trade, right? So and I've heard over and over again, people say, like, it's like, hey, where's the data model? It's like, oh, we don't have the data yet, so we can't create the data model. I'm like, well, you doing e-commerce? We're doing sales, right? Cool. So you got customer as a dimension, you've got time, you've got product, you've got sales in the middle, right? So there's your data model. Let's get started.
Nirav, I'm
Yeah.
particularly curious from a CEO's perspective. You're the one that's getting everybody else's data and they're all fighting for your attention. How do you decide which data is the most important to evaluate today?
Yeah, it's challenging from a client perspective, right? Because many times they get stuck in the tools aspect, which Gordon talked about. And once you initiate the project, half of the time is like, just for example, on cloud, whether they want to go on Azure route or AWS route or Snowflake route, rather than worrying about what the business problem is, or even from an ETL perspective, right? Fitrans, DBTs, or other ETL tools of the world. Same with data visualization part. So much argument about Tableau and Power BI, I've given up. Even internally within my company, forget about dealing with customers on that aspect of it, right? So again, going back to what the business problem is and what the data is, I'm working with a client on manufacturing side. They are setting up what is called as data historian, because we have data coming from different sensors, and it's been 3 years setting up data. This is one of the largest biotech companies we are talking about, right? Billion of revenues. Okay, so till the time that setup and all that whole roadmap, and then getting that data into that data historian, that data collection, and all that part of business problem, how we can efficiently improve the production process, is still on hold, right? So if the production process is more important than this tool or this roadmap of developing that architecture, this is important, but there should be ways to get around that, talking about like how data model is, right? We could get data in Excel or CSV or just SQL dump and can at least start on that, right? But those are typical challenges, and it's like the business or various BUs inside an organization, especially an enterprise, and then obviously the IT, right? So those, like, it's a classic struggle, right? IT is more worried about the spend. Business is obviously interested in how to get the outcomes, right? And then there are like pet peeves of data analysts and data scientists, right? What they want to do, right? They are interested in like Jupyter notebooks, whereas the business is like, what Jupyter are you talking about? Like Planet or something, right? Or a
I have been
notebook like
there.
a paper pad. So
really interesting discussion. I think the other kind of side of this question is, we've talked about, there's a ton of data out there. We've talked about how we figure out which data is the most important. Now let's imagine a perfect world where you could go up to your biggest client or your boss or your CEO and say, I need you to care about this data point. Like, this is truly the most important data point that you need to care about to understand my side of the business. No story, no narrative. You don't have to convince them. You don't have to make pretty visualizations. You can just get them to understand it. What's that data point for you? What is the thing that matters most? I'll give you a second to think.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, I'm not answering.
You-
Sorry, I was just thinking. That's a good question.
yeah.
I'll say people out like it's weird to say. So you all start off as like a person, and then you become a number, and then you kind of get lost in a sense. So I usually always think about the people aspect of it. So like that humanness, like how do I go back to that story? I know I'm not telling stories, but how do I make sure that that person or that cohort is actually being seen? And I'll take one example. So like rare diseases, we have like rare disease conferences, and if you don't really care about it, you're not gonna really put on an event or like share anything, because only a few people are affected by rare diseases. So if it was just a number, and all the long terms of diseases that we have in the world, if you didn't care about like that, let's say 0.1%, then they basically get overlooked. But that 0.1% is actually a big, large population, right? So I'll say people.
Spoken like a true marketer.
That's my job.
Now I know I'm on the right panel. So there's always another data point, right? I mean, there's some ultimate North Star vision, but there's always another data point. But the one I want to start with is psychological or emotional safety of your team, right? And we're data people, right? So we should be measuring ourselves. But if you're a manager, I strongly encourage you, and if you're a teammate, I strongly encourage you, and even for individuals, look at yourself. Where's your emotional and psychological safety? Because with safety and trust comes the ability to be creative, right? It comes the ability to look forward and to like spend all your energy on building something. If you don't feel safe on your team, or if your team doesn't feel safe, they're not going to bring that creativity, they're not going to bring that honesty. They're going to be worrying about taking care of themselves, right? And probably thinking about leaving. Plus, they're going to be miserable, right? So really, I think if I'm going to look at one number, I'm going to be looking at the emotional or psychological safety of my team.
Yeah, we don't have those kind of problems. We work with clients, so I don't think they're worried about our emotional safety. They're worried in their outcomes, but we constantly probe them. Ours is a different ball game, right? So we have to constantly probe them as to their desired outcome, whether it's like sales data. What are they missing? What tools are they using? On the sales channel, we are, like, just to give an example, we are developing a recommendation engine for warehouse distribution center, right? So right now we are just working with point of sale data, right? So where is the e-com data come? Why can't we incorporate that? We are working with a wearable device where they're trying to prevent slip, trips, and falls in an industrial environment, right? So we did the first round of iteration and model building. Now we are working with them and University of Pittsburgh, where they are doing the research and trying to see how can that process be improved, right? Can we do like video and feed in addition to the wearable device data? So those are the questions at least we come up with our knowledge and our experience, and obviously trying to understand the domain and trying to talk more with them. So that's how we try to probe them more.
Got it. Very, very helpful, very different perspectives. We've had about 40 minutes now of a really interesting conversation from 3 very different experiences and backgrounds on data and narrative and storytelling. So I want to give the audience a chance, both in person and virtually, to ask any questions. Data's a big area. I see we have one. We got a couple already. So I think mics are coming to you. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and maybe for context, your background or your job or your industry.
Sure. Yep. Hi, thank you so much for this. This was really lovely. My name is Amma. I am UX writing and content design on the job hunt. So if you like what I have to say, let's talk. I was really drawn to the piece that you talked about in terms of the single data points being human related, either on terms of the team that you're working on or the people that you're working with. So as someone who kind of builds that content specifically with the end user in mind, how do you all think about telling a story when you know there are chapters missing? So as an example, if the data that you're given maybe isn't representing certain groups or might be overlooking certain questions, how do you go forth by saying, this is the story that we have, but I know it's not the whole story? How do you have that conversation?
I'm a very blunt person, so I just outrightly say this doesn't make sense to me. And sometimes you just kind of have to say it and say it all over again, because again, people might not care, but if you care, you're like, you know that it matters and it will change the story, then you just have to keep pushing. And you get creative. You start like trying to figure out ways to make them understand, like relate more to them in that human aspect, right? So, and if your story was missing from that, and if your parents' story was missing from that, how would you feel? But and I'll say, I work in the life sciences. We don't do science in my company, but I think about the drugs that are being developed. And if they didn't do a drug for this person, right? So what does that say about us as a company? And again, we're in a world where any little thing you do, you could get canceled. So do you want to get canceled? No, I'm pretty sure. Or you talk about revenue, right? So we could lose revenue because of this. So you just find a way to relate to the decision maker on what part of the stories is missing. And I say a big part of it too is being honest, because sometimes you're not going to get that information in time to be able to, let's say, do that project that you need to do. So you write out saying that there are some key pieces missing, but this is what we have based on the data.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. You know, I might try to boil it down to being authentic versus performative. Do you care about the decision these people are making, right? Or do you just care that you look like you've done a good job, right? I could be performative and come across as being effective, or I could actually be effective. And sometimes it's admitting that, hey, we did this study, but we did a study in Silicon Valley, so that demographic doesn't look that much like another part of the country, right? And if you work for tech startups, constantly product direction is driven by like the opinions of the employees who match a certain demographic, right? So you have to, you got to think about like, do I really care about this decision? And then, am I telling the full story?
Yeah, just to add, right? Excellent question, because we encountered this like 3 or 4 months ago. We were working on a proposal for Boston Public Health data, and this was the similar question asked to us. And our stand was that we look at the data, we'll evaluate the data, and we'll constantly, keep asking what kind of demographic data or income trends and things what are missing, and that's how we're going to try to bring out the best results possible within the data. But exactly similar to what real time or real life problems could be, but it's easy to mislead with data. You can easily lie with data.
And I'll also add to, which is sort of related, is it was not a personal story, but I worked with somebody that worked at BMC, and around the COVID vaccine, there were a population of people that were not taking the vaccine. And the reason why they weren't taking the vaccine is just not just the huge misinformation that was out there, but they weren't being considered, right? The ads that you were being seen, like the people that were going out to the neighborhoods, they didn't speak their language. They didn't know how to talk to them. They didn't see themselves in these ads. Like nobody looked like them. So it was a really big point for BMC to actually get a group together to canvas out and to talk to people in their own languages, to relate back to them what the importance of like taking that vaccine was.
I think there was a question in the back, and then we'll come to you next.
Yes. Hi, Anthony Franklin. I'm a former VP of sales and now raising a search fund to buy a software company. So it's funny because using data to guide kind of your narrative is so important. And whether you're starting a startup, I've been in a lot of Series A startups and have seen some disaster decks. Like they presented something and I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but you just see something pictured and you're like, but that does not tell the other part of this. And a good example was what you guys said about pie charts, which is such a disaster. It's not a comparison in time. It's just one point in time, and it doesn't tell you, is that good? Is that going up? Is that going down? So are there any other like reporting pitfalls that maybe you see on a regular basis that you go, I wish people wouldn't do that with data. That's not how you want to be telling your story. So,
I mean, I'll say one thing is that leading of analysis before language, right? So you're all excited. You discovered something. You understand this. You see an outlier. Here's an opportunity to make more money or make your customers happy or save costs or something like that. And you lead straight into the analysis with your audience, right? And of course, we're all really busy, and now we're on Zoom, and we know that the audience has a limited amount of attention. You got maybe 2 minutes. So they go straight into the point, but they don't make sure that the audience can understand what you're saying, right? So again, I'm a technologist. I could talk about like tons of three-letter acronyms, obviously, all this technology, all this stuff. Or you could be a marketer and you're talking about like ROAS and CAC and all these other things. But maybe someone's not from that world. They don't understand these things. But if you say, okay, the point of this presentation is to talk about how we can get more customers for less money, right? And we found something really interesting. Lead with, and then here's some terms that are important for us to understand. Here's why, and then go into the analysis. So language before analysis, right? We teach a subject like math. You know, you got to teach the terms, right? Before you start going into like, here's how you calculate the area of a, under a graph or whatever, right? So, but we see it all the time, right? You rush right into the analysis without making sure your audience has the tools necessary to understand what you're saying.
Yeah, totally. And just like, pie chart is obviously the best example, and but there are so many other aspects of it, right? Forget just normal people, even like me. In early days of my career, I didn't know like what colors not to use, like because of colorblind and accessibility issues, right? We get into so many fights with like the clients on, management just because the colors they want to use. Even we try to say that those are not colorblind friendly, or like textual, right? Everybody loves going back to spreadsheets. Like once we had a customer like big Fortune 500, all the dashboards were basically Excel. Yeah. So it was just, and our client or our point of contact was, her logic was awesome, that these guys have been using Excel. The only way I can migrate them to advanced data visualization is I give them this content first. And I was like, okay, fair point. Right. So those are the various challenges to work with clients or just like stakeholders.
And I'll add one thing that I also see is feedback. You never understand what you don't know if you don't ask. So often I see a lack of feedback. Like really, you just you get this data set, you kind of present the story, and then you're done. Right. But then it's like, did you really present the actual story? Is it representative of what you're asking for? Was it any miscommunication? Could we have done it better? So it's always like asking yourself, because then it helps inform the data itself and then a better story too.
Excellent. I think we have a question here, and then maybe if we can get the mic going around again.
Sure. Hi. Great presentation. Data storytelling is always a lot of fun and a big challenge. I wonder whether you guys can speak a little to some of the advances in data types that you're seeing, and specifically some of the CLV and demand-based data that's emerging through online transactions, app-based transactions. Are you seeing people build around demand-based data sets versus the typical supply-based data set?
No.
I thought you might be closer to that problem than me.
I'm clearly not as close to the problem at all.
So I can't say specifically, right? But what I can say that over my entire career is that we have constantly brought on new data sets, right, with greater and greater volume, right? And then the data sets in their entirety have more value, right? And of course, value is being defined ability to drive it, change in some particular outcome. But the other thing to think about is that the cost of extracting data value from this data is also going up and up. If you follow we mentioned Snowflake earlier. I don't want to get in trouble with Frank, their CEO, but if you look at the news lately, you'll see a lot of stories about some outrageous bills, right? And that's because people are putting the data sets ahead of the business problem and not thinking about that straight ahead of time. But throwing some terms out there, thinking about like the economics of data, right? So if you're at a growing company, your future value, your future volumes, probably greater than what you already have, right? You're increasing in size, more customers, more granularity there. You probably have more in the future than in the past. Why does that matter? Well, people talk about fixing bad data, right? All my history and so on and so on. How well are you doing in terms of collecting your data? Because if you're not collecting it well and ensuring that's safe to use, don't bother fixing the old stuff. That stuff is depreciating. So that's another term, right? Data depreciation. The value of your data it goes down over time, right? A weather report loses value pretty fast at some point. The history is still useful for trending, but we all know, like, yesterday's weather report is not as interesting as tomorrow's weather report, right?
All right, I think we have time for 2 more questions, so why don't we take one here? And I think there might be one more interest in the back or up here. I'll let our microphone friend help out with that.
Hi.
Right.
I think the online won't hear you if you don't. Sorry. Hello. Okay, how about, yeah, okay, there we go. Hi,
I'm Sagar. I've been in marketing for around 10 years, tend to stick around CMO positions and whatnot. About narrative, I view narrative as a story. There's chapters to the story. Sometimes in my experience, I discovered stepping into a company and it's like, here, let's look at the data, look at the narrative. They needed to rewrite their earlier chapters. As a marketer, it's like I'm taking this data and looking at it long term. It's like, okay, each step is going to be the next step to the next to the next, as long as the data is set. My question is, what's with your experiences in terms of bad chapters? How do you go back and to rewrite it at the same time as keep taking steps forwards with the narrative?
Honesty is always key. It works in relationships and it also works with data. I think because there's so much information out there all the time, and it can be manipulated. It's really key for you to be honest with it, right? We all make mistakes, so it's very important to let people know that this was a bad time for us, or this did not represent the company, or it did not represent the population. So if you tell people that you're correcting this mistake, I think it gives you a leeway to actually lead in your story, and people are actually going to believe you. They're going to believe you because you've been honest with what the history of the data was and where you made the mistake. So I say just tell them honestly and be honest with yourself as well. Like you can say, I did not do this correctly, or we didn't do this correctly, and how do we prevent that mistake from happening again?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And with the caveat, of course, that, not all of us enjoy being in the position of being able to learn from our mistakes, and sometimes that's outside of your control, right? And we all like to say, hey, make some mistakes, you can learn from it. I've got a little bit more careful about saying that, right? Because again, not everyone is in the same position of privilege as I am, whether because of my gender or my ethnicity or what have you, right? But I also like to say that, especially to my team and so on, if you have bad news, please tell it to me. I love bad news, right? Because bad news represents an opportunity to prevent some outcome I don't want. Hey, the house is on fire. That's bad news, but that gives me a chance to, make a difference, right? But if you're worried about me, if I've set up a situation where the messenger is afraid of being shot, then maybe I don't hear about the house being on fire, or the car is broken down, or it was towed, or something like that, or we had this massive cost overrun, right? So it's like I want to hear bad news, and the way I flip that around, talking to my management, is like saying, hey, I owe it to you to give you bad news, even when I discover it later on, right? Because that's how we learn from these opportunities. I'm not doing my job if I hide it.
Yeah, we work with historical data so much. We have given a lot of bad news to our clients. But that's what it is, right? Whether it's comparing the yield of a product or purity of a product, or just how their sales were doing, or things like that, and what their understanding was. But that's why historical analysis is so important, so that we can move forward and what remediation or what steps or whatever the strategy can be taken. So it's our job to be, and we, sometimes we are brutally honest, but works in our favor. The client might not like at that time, but eventually they come around it.
I'll tell a really, really quick marketing story, right? And so it's super quick. So the client I had 2 years ago, where I did a quick analysis of our campaign management performance. We were doing SEM campaigns, bidding, keyword bidding, so on and so on and so on. Quick spreadsheet, little sort, whatever. And I figured out hey, we spent $50,000 on this campaign, 50,000 euros, right? How many customers do we get out of it? 1. Nice. How much did we sell this product for? 5 euros per month. All right. That's a payback period of nearly 1,000 years, right? Assuming you get all profit on that product, right? That's a bad campaign, right? The second worst campaign spent 30,000 for 1 customer again. So this is bad news, right? But, told my boss, told marketing, what was the outcome? We immediately saved $80,000 next month, right? Because this is $15,000, $30,000 per month. So that bad news was turned into a positive, right? Because we were able to act on it. By the way, I used a spreadsheet.
Yeah, it works. That's just similar to another story. We were working with a med device company, and they wanted to build additional lines. We did a simple waterfall chart. They have 2 shifts a day, 365 days a week, 65 days in a year, right? So we did like, okay, this is the max utilization of those lines. These are the, stoppage, Thanksgiving holidays, Christmas holidays, whatever, turnover, because they manufacture different products on the same line. And what we came up to was something around like 620, some number. And they were running at like somewhere 480, 490. So by a simple waterfall chart, we could clearly show them that forget about additional capex. You still have this existing, capacity in your lines, which you are not utilizing. The VP didn't like it, obviously. Luckily we were not fired from the project. But those are simple things looking at historical data.
I think that's all the time that we have for today. So friends, thank you all so much for joining us in person and virtually. And thank you to our fantastic panel for really thoughtful, insightful answers and conversation. And remember, if you take nothing else away from this, we love Excel, we hate pie charts. Thanks all.
Thank you.